So I've got a message for some folks that comment to the channel on a regular basis. The Oregon football program has not collapsed and died just because they lost 2 consecutive games. Things are going still pretty well in Eugene. We got Ryan Winter on the line from Sports Chat 503. Ryan, good to see you.
Hey, good to see you too, Mark.
So, yeah,
Oregon hasn't collapsed. The recruiting team, is fine. It's a young team. It's just unexpected 2 losses. That's all it is.
You were supposed to win all your games and look impressive doing it and be in the playoff conversation.
I think the playoff conversation, though, is really kind of, taking a turn for the worse, maybe, for college football. There's just on the level of, what we grew up with bowls and having teams have an opportunity to kind of show off a one last game or have an opportunity to play a different conference. And there was a lot of excitement around the bowl season. And now it feels like there's so much attention on the college football playoff that we've really kind of done a disservice to the rest of those bowls. And this year it's going to be even worse because you're going to have a lot of them canceled.
I don't like it. We even see conference championship games now. You've experienced it the last few years in the Pac-12. We see it now, probably Pac-12, certainly Big 12, where it's like people are just like, whatever. Doesn't have anything to do with the playoff.
Yeah, well, there was a big discussion when that happened. There were a lot of people with Pac-10 who loved the round robin schedule. They loved the ability to play everybody in the conference and having a true champion and not needing a conference championship game. And they really thought that it might have diluted the product when they added the 2 schools. Not no offense to Colorado and Utah, but just the sense that you don't get a true champion. You have to play that conference championship game.
Got Ryan Winter on the line. Check out his work on Sports Chat 503 right here on YouTube, covering the Ducks of Oregon taking on Washington this weekend. And again, all signs are pointing up for this program. You had to replace a quarterback who's doing extremely well right now as a rookie in the NFL, an experienced offensive line, the most experienced and one of the best in college football. So there were parts to, and then just sure, there are certain teams and programs and coaches that are handling this situation better than others. That's obvious. But then there are some that just by happenstance and just the way things play out, it just becomes a more difficult adversity. And you're going to have some quirky kind of scores and some results that we wouldn't normally have happen.
Yeah, it's one of those years where, it's just so strange. We were talking right before we went on, and it's such a strange year. At the beginning of the season, we just wanted to have a season, right? Oregon was set up for a really good year this year. A lot of returning players. They had pretty good expectations, and then it got shortened, and then everything else happened. And then Ducks started the first 3 games, and you're like, okay, hey, this looks good. As soon as they lost these 2 games, you're like, this season's kind of just like practice or whatever. Let's get to the next one. It's funny how the momentum changes so fast.
Yeah, so all that said, we've got 1 game left in the Pac-12 regular season. Then you're going to have this interesting, and I think this is a great idea that both the Big Ten and the Pac-12 is doing with championship weekend and seeding the rest of the teams and letting us see another week of football. So who knows who you're going to play that particular weekend, and then a bowl game. So there's still 3 games left to play. What is this team playing for at this point?
Well, again, I think big picture, you got to look at both these losses were very close. If you got a first down, you beat the Beavs, you get that win, you escape. If you had just converted a couple extra plays, not fumbled the ball at the very end, got yourself into the end zone, or had a couple plays go against you, it was a very close game against Cal as well. So we're not talking about blowouts here. We're talking about the rest of the conference is fairly decent. You're losing to teams that are on the come up. Cal and Oregon State are both really intense. They're trying to get that victory. They look at Oregon as a big game to circle. I think Oregon has a lot to play for. This weekend, you're still playing for the Conference North championship, and whoever wins this game gets to go to that Pac-12 championship game. Looks like it's going to be against USC. There's going to be a conversation around that with Colorado and USC not being able to play each other, but USC looks like that's the case maybe. And if Oregon gets to play against USC that I saw on Sunday and that we've seen for Oregon for the last 2 weeks, I don't know if I really want to watch that game, Mark, but Oregon is trajectorying better. They're a very young team, one of the youngest teams in college football with a really good recruiting class coming in. I kind of feel like this year was a year that was going to be, hey, let's see what we get out of this, but our real trajectory is moving forward into next year and the year after.
Could the Pac-12 not have had USC and Colorado play this past weekend?
I mean, that's what we were saying big time, because you knew what you were going to get, especially when they moved it back that extra day. You knew what you were going to get with Washington State. It feels like Washington State's kind of running out of steam a little bit. They've been hit by COVID really bad, and they've had just a really tough kind of up and down. When they played Oregon, they actually were looking pretty good, but the wheels are starting to fall off there. It was not a good game. It was a good game for USC for just putting one of those things on the board for them, but it would have been fantastic for the conference to see really what you get with Colorado. You don't really know. They're still in transition, but they look really ahead of schedule. And then with USC as a team that everybody loves to hype to beginning of the year, because they know USC. They're familiar with USC. They have tradition, and they have great recruits. Don't get me wrong, but we were at the USC game last year, and the discontent with Clay Helton and that coaching staff is severe. Those fans down there are very upset with him. So every game he wins, they're kind of upset. They want a new regime in there. They want something different because they know what they have is a sleeping giant at USC.
Yes, they do. And just to get back to my point, so if certain people aren't familiar, USC and Colorado were scheduled 2 weekends ago. The game was canceled, and they're the two undefeated teams in the division. So there's going to be a strange tiebreaker system that's going to elevate USC into the championship game, but not based on real results on the field, which drives me crazy when the two teams could have played. Now, last weekend, USC played this game against Washington State. Arizona played Colorado.
Right.
So you're not even messing up a division game. I could understand it if Arizona or Washington State had a division game that you would be messing up by switching it, but you're just changing their non-division game is basically what you're doing by having Arizona play Washington State, and then you've got USC and Colorado matched up to decide the division.
Right. And like you said before, I mean, you don't need 12 years to set these games up if you're doing it 48 hours in advance almost on some of these weekends. I tend to think the Pac-12 leadership is the biggest question mark of it all. I think there's some major discontent out here on the West Coast around who's running this thing and how they're running it, from the referees, from who's running the refs, to the transparency between that. There's been a lot of question marks across the board. I am happy that they got a season together. I am happy that they got the situation with the testing and everything else up on board so that they could go through and follow through, because the state standards out here are very strict that they have to accompany to. So I do feel like they got a couple wins there, but the way that this conference is run, there's a lot of question marks out there. It looks like from our perspective right now that USC is the team that the national media will get behind in these last couple of weeks and say, hey, what about them? If they go undefeated, then you're going to have national media start to turn around and say, but what about the West Coast? Very different than any other team outside maybe Oregon. There's just not that much cachet for the Pac-12. Even a team like Washington has to really fight through it nowadays to get the kind of respect that they would need or deserve nationally.
Tyler Shough, first year starting. I heard actually somebody on YouTube make a comment about what a major disappointment he's been. I don't know if this person necessarily even saw him throw a pass in these 5 games. He's played 5 games. It's a very disrupted season. He's played 5 games. He's replacing an NFL quarterback. How would you assess his play?
Well, I think he does some things well. I think some people are just so used to seeing, like you're talking about, seeing some really good quarterback play last year. They also are taking more chances. They're putting a little bit more. Last year it felt like they really had kid gloves around Herbert. Herbert this year is just lighting the world on fire. Last year he was throwing screen passes to the sideline. So it feels like the different regime in the offensive coordinator, Joe Moorhead, is much more of a gambler. He'll take more risks, and they're asking Tyler to do more things. They do more of the zone read, and it's a real true zone read, whereas Justin Herbert last year wasn't running at all until the very end of the year. And this year Shough is running all the time. The numbers play out that Shough is doing well. Quarterback percentage wise, completions, all these kind of things. He does find a way to make some really big plays. I think some of his biggest plays are actually when the pocket collapses, he steps through the pocket and he sees the field very well. He tends to put the ball on the money. I think the problem is sometimes that they're misreading the zone read, and he's finding himself in a situation where he's handing off when he should have pulled it. But they're also asking a lot of him. You're right. 5 starts in. We saw the same thing when Marcus Mariota came in. We saw the same thing when Herbert came in as a freshman. We've seen great quarterbacks at Oregon struggle in their first year. There's going to be ups and downs. But I feel like so far, overall, I would give him a B.
64% completion percentage, 11 touchdowns and 4 picks for Tyler Shough in just these 5 games. So we got the game coming up against Washington. as we're kind of framing the conversation, USC, the gold standard historically, Oregon, probably the best program, despite the 2 losses, people. I know it's 2 games, but the best program right now by other measurements. But during that gap of time for 3 or 4 years, it was Washington and Chris Peterson. Do you think that they've taken a step back or in transition, or do you think that this is just, and I'm going to discard again the 2020 season to a certain extent, and we've seen 3 or 4 football games, big deal, but do you think they're in the same place under Jimmy Lake?
It's going to be a while. I think I really respect Washington. There's a lot of kind of a love loss between Oregon and Washington. People they enjoy the rivalry there. They enjoy the hate a little bit. I really respect Washington. I think it's the greatest college football setting on the lake up there. It's beautiful, and I think they have a lot to play for. They're a big time recruiting school as well. They're trying to get the same recruits that Oregon's getting. In the last couple of years, Oregon's maybe won out on a couple of those kids, but there's a lot of kids that still commit to Washington that Oregon has their eyes on. So there's a lot of consistency and community that we know each other fairly well. So I just think that heightens the rivalry. I tend to think that they'll be fine. I think that offensively, they're still trying to find themselves, pro style offense when, in a world where everybody's gone spread and everything else kind of looks a little different, that they have such good defensive players. Their defensive front is one of the most disruptive in the conference. Their offensive line this year is one of the best in the conference. They've got great skill players, and they always tend to find a way. They need to find maybe a little bit more consistency with quarterback, with having a more long-term quarterback because of the way that they've had the grad transfers and whatnot. But some schools find themselves in that position where they have everybody else on the team. They have all the pieces. They're just looking for that one quarterback. So I tend to think that if Washington's able to win this weekend against Oregon, they can kind of reclaim that champion of the North sort of situation going forward. They're going to be a real tough team to beat.
All right, folks, lock it in here. If you love college football, Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, it's the time of year to do it, certainly, but also get on over to Sports Chat 503. Sports Chat 503, let me pull it up right here. You join Ryan Winter right there. Bam. You get some good stuff from him on Oregon football. The setting puts me to shame, Ryan, behind you. It looks good. You're always color coordinated. Looks great.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate you so much, man. Really appreciate what you do for college football and for all of us on YouTube, man.